Welcome to the Tuesday, September 3rd, 2019 edition of the Clemson Dubcast. Fun week, fun matchup. Even though it's a 17 to 19 point spread with Clemson the favorite, kind of has some intrigue for sure with Jimbo Fisher coming to town, Kellen Mond, talented Aggies team for sure, and Jimbo Fisher's second year in charge there. Plenty of news and analysis leading up to the game this week. Right now, as a matter of fact, there's an article sort of examining the personnel groupings, the use of 3 receiver sets with a tight end versus 4 receivers and no tight end. Didn't use much of it against Georgia Tech. I think that's partly because they didn't have to. They want to keep it in their hat until they really need it. And then also they want to develop those tight ends. So sort of took a little deepish dive into that at TigerIllustrated.com. Also, Paul Strelo with some recruiting intel on Jordan Burch and also Justin Flo up on the site right now. Always good stuff from old Paulie Streets. Title sponsor of the Clemson Dubcast, Parham Smith Archenhold Law Firm in downtown Greenville. They have been with us from the very beginning. Blake Smith has been a good friend of mine for years, dating back to the days when he taught a law class at Clemson with Terry Don Phillips. Also, Brooke Archenhold, major Clemson fans. The forte of their firm, which is at 15 Washington Park in Greenville, is medical negligence. They represent patients and their families in medical negligence actions. Also handle all sorts of other personal injury litigation. Free consultations, Parham Smith and Archenhold. Give them a call, 864-990-4581, or go to parhamlaw.com. Want to welcome aboard to the podcast Blackacre Law Firm, sister law firm of Parham Smith and Archenhold in Greenville. Stuart James is a 1998 Clemson grad, big Clemson fan, just like the Parham Smith and Archenhold family. Blackacre gives you the representation you can depend on when you're on the home stretch, closing on your house. All those documents you're signing, all those technical aspects of it. The last thing you want is for something to go wrong at that point. Blackacre also provides services for wills, powers of attorney, durable, and healthcare. Don't put yourself and your family in a bad situation by not having these important documents. Call today for a consultation, 864-775-5400, or go to their website, blackacrelawfirm.com. That's BLACKACRE lawfirm.com. All right, 2 guests for this show, the first of 2 this week. Wanted to talk to Cole Cubelic, ESPN analyst who was in College Station last week for their game against Texas State, and also kind of had a bit of a wild hair. Wanted to talk to old Corey Clark of warchant.com just to see what it is like down in Tallahassee after they squander an 18-point lead and lose to Boise State, that mess of a second half in front of a whole bunch of steaming hot aluminum. We'll start with Cole. Not sure you're going to like his prediction for the game, but he has some good insight nonetheless about this matchup. All right, here we go. Enjoy. Okay, joined by Cole Cubelic, second-time participant on the podcast. I think we had you the week of the A&M game, Clemson A&M game last year, so only fitting that we have you back. How you doing, man?
Oh, I'm doing great, man. I'm honored to be back. I appreciate it.
What does Cole Cubelic do on we're recording this on a Tuesday afternoon. What does Tuesday look like for you, work-wise?
Tuesday, got up this morning, helped get the kids dressed and fed and on their way to school. Had 2 radio interviews with 2 different stations. Had a conference call with my television crew for this weekend. Got to the radio station at WJLX here in Birmingham. Had a little production meeting around 9 o'clock, and then did radio from 10 to 2, and now I'm on the phone with you.
At what point do you feel like you have to say, whether it's from me or whoever asking you to do an interview, no?
That's interesting that you bring that up, because that has been a major point of contention with my wife and I for the last probably 2 or 3 years. I kind of pride myself on doing everything, and if somebody asks me to do it, I'm going to do my best to do it. And if I tell you no, that means I legitimately cannot do it. But the last 2 years, specifically going into this year, because last year was pretty nutty, she's just been like, you've got to cut down on the amount of things that you're doing. And you have to learn to tell people no, and I'm not good at it. But I think it's still early in the year for that. Probably another week or two, and it's going to have to be. I'm going to have to tell some people that I just am not able to do it. I need to hang. And when I started this, I didn't have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, which now I do. So that makes it a lot easier to tell people I can't do it because I'd rather spend time with them.
All right, I'm writing a note down for 2020. Call Cole in the first week or two of the season. All right, so you did 2 games this past weekend. You were in Nashville, right?
Yeah, actually, I did 3 games in 7 days. I was in Columbia, South Carolina. There, we did Southern Columbia at Hammond School on Sunday, and then Tuesday night flew to College Station, and we did A&M Texas State, and then obviously flew to Nashville Friday morning and did Georgia Vanderbilt Saturday night. Okay,
your take on Jordan Burch from what you saw?
Oh man, just a physical freak show. He's an interesting cat because I think he'll be a defensive tackle. And he kind of reminds me more of a Christian Wilkins type guy. Like, I don't see him being a Dexter Lawrence type guy. He's very fluid, very athletic. I mean, he runs point guard for their basketball team and can apparently shoot the ball extremely well. So I think he's a guy that you could move down inside because he's 270 right now. So he could probably carry, 285, 290. And you put him down inside, and he's athletic enough to move around and win some one-on-ones in space, but he's big enough to hold the point and to be able to manage double teams and things like that inside. So I think he's going to be a big-time D1 division tackle. And if he can find a scheme that could take advantage of his athleticism, I think anybody would be thrilled to have him.
Cole, what's your general take on the fallout from some of these SEC results? Obviously, in the Birmingham neck of the woods, people are happy at both Alabama and Auburn after what happened, but it really felt like some monumental developments in Knoxville, in Charlotte, where North Carolina beat South Carolina. What's your sort of take, and some other losses too? What's the reaction, I guess, the common reaction from the average SEC fan?
I think it's surprise first, disappointment second. And for me personally, Larry, I think it just shows you it's still a team sport. You can have a great quarterback, you can have great skill guys, but games are still won and lost in the trenches, number one. Number two, you got to play team ball, and you can't lose time of possession. You can't turn it over 3 or 4 times. You can't allow a team to hold you to 98 yards rushing. All those things matter. And if you get dominated in 1 or 2 aspects of the game, then your team's not going to have a good chance of being successful. And a lot of times it's difficult to get a lot of different players on board with that. So, I haven't lost any confidence in Missouri's offense. I think Tennessee still has a better roster than Georgia State, top to bottom. I mean, when you look at Trey Smith and you look at Batuli and Darrell Taylor and Nigel Warrior and Marquez Callaway, I mean, they got some guys. They got some guys that are going to play in the NFL. So it's just getting everybody on the same page, having an understanding of what you need to accomplish as a team, and then being able to plug talent into that. And that's not an easy task, especially at a place where things have not been great recently. And like I said, I think games are still won and lost in the trenches. South Carolina's O-line didn't play great. Tennessee's O-line did not play well at all. And obviously that Missouri defensive line didn't play well, giving up a boatload of rushing yards to Wyoming. So I think a lot of fans disappointed, but probably more surprised than they are disappointed.
I saw a quote from an Auburn player after the win over Oregon. I forgot who it was, but he said something to the effect of, we couldn't lose to a Pac-12 team, from an inferior conference. We couldn't deal with that. It really got me thinking the psychological effect of players, maybe coaches, being told over and over, whether it's Feinbaum or whoever, a bunch of SEC media folks, that we're superior to these other conferences. You mentioned the trenches, but psychologically, do you think this has any effect? Obviously not at the top, which is pretty strong, as Georgia and Alabama and LSU showed, but maybe those middle-of-the-road teams for which there aren't aren't a whole lot of difference between them perhaps and some teams from some other conferences. Maybe that sort of false sense of superiority. Do you see where I'm going? Does that possibly have an effect when it comes down?
I mean, I don't think that's an SEC thing. I think that's that may be more of a recruiting thing. And I think there are a lot of recruits that think when they sign on with an SEC school or a Power 5 school or a Big 10 or Pac-12 school that they're just better than a whole lot of people. And they're just going to run in there and they're going to put up 22,000 yards rushing or 4,200 yards passing and X amount of touchdowns or X amount of sacks like they did in high school. And it's not the way it is. I think a lot of college football players are being told that they're great at a lot of things from a much younger age, much more often than they were before. And the part about the SEC thing, that's probably real. I mean, a lot of these, imagine, I mean, you said that from the SEC media perspective. Imagine what they're hearing from their friends, their family, the student body, people on social media. I mean, that's got to be like times 3,000 what you're describing from media that cover them. So, sure, it impacts you in a certain way, but I don't think I don't believe that Barry Odom doesn't go out and try to prepare his team, or Jeremy Odom or Jeremy Pruitt doesn't understand how to get his team ready, or Will Muschamp doesn't understand how to coach a team or prepare a team. I mean, I know those coaches. I know those staffs, and they know how to coach football. So it's why it's the greatest team sport on earth. And it's why you can't go out and rely on 1, 2, 3 guys to be great. You got to be a great team if you're going to win football games.
Yeah, it just seems like conversely it provides so much motivation. You know, Sean Elliott mentioned it in the locker room after they beat Tennessee. You know, they say it means more. Well, it meant more to us today. And North Carolina fans chanting ACC. It just seems to fester, you know, this constant, I guess, narrative, whatever you want to call it, about the SEC's superiority, and doesn't really do them any favors psychologically, I guess, when it comes to having to face all these teams that are these non-conference opponents that are so motivated, it seems.
No, it's a fair point, and I'm sure there's some reality to it, but that's also part of the coaching staff. Is we always hear the phrase, you know, coaching them back down or de-recruiting them. And I mean, that's a real thing that has to happen. And unfortunately now you have to re-recruit a lot of your kids every day because of the transfer portal. And then on top of that, you got to re-recruit them and then de-recruit them almost daily. Coaching is as difficult as it's ever been, which makes what Dabo and Nick Saban and Lincoln Riley makes what they're doing just that much more impressive.
All right. So when we talked a year ago, you were very wary of Clemson going to College Station. I think some folks might have been a bit, and definitely Clemson fans were a bit surprised because I think Clemson was a double-digit favorite, I want to say. But you said you thought that game was going to be really close. It was. Clemson very fortunate to get out of there with a win. What do you make of A&M after spending, I guess, a couple of days in College Station last week?
I think they're a very similar team. I think they have a chance to be a better team. And I understand it's difficult for a lot of people to look at it and say, well, man, they lost all their linebackers, and Kingsley Keke and Daylon Mack are gone off that D-line, and the SEC's leading rusher is gone, and you had this stud of a tight end that was a mismatch, and he's gone. I get all of that. I understand it. But I think, number one, you began to see the change in culture a year ago, and that's only going to continue to amplify. And I think the strengths of this football team match up very well with Clemson in most areas. There's one obvious glaring area that I don't think maybe other than LSU, anybody's going to be able to match up with Clemson this year, and that's their wide receivers and their quarterback. But I look at how this game played out a year ago, and you didn't see Clemson just march up and down the field on this defense. And I think it comes down to something very similar that it did last year, and that's there's going to be 4 to 6 balls down the field, and who's going to make those plays? Is it going to be Justin Ross and T. Higgins and Amari Rodgers, or could it be Damani Richardson or Elijah Blades or Miles Jones? I think that will decide the game again. I'm confident that the Texas A&M defensive line may be better than they were a season ago. And I think that overall, top to bottom, I don't think that they're a less talented football team than they were a season ago. They just may not have as much talent with as much experience as they did a season ago. They'll be a little bit different, but I absolutely expect Texas A&M to give Clemson a game. And being in Death Valley is going to make it much more difficult. Obviously, I think Clemson being a more physical team offensively this year, and maybe a team even with a little bit of a different mindset offensively, sort of being run first a little bit more, and maybe more emphasis on the downhill rushing attack this year, makes them a little bit different. But I think it's a heck of a matchup when you begin to study what Clemson is and what A&M is and the chess match that's going to ensue. And there's one part of this game that I don't think you'll hear a lot of people talk about this week that I think makes it really the most intriguing game that we may have all season, and it's how well coached these two teams are. I mean, Brent Venables against Jimbo Fisher that's as good as it gets, really and truly. I mean, Jimbo is an offensive wizard, and Venables has been unbelievable the last few years. Just to see how they attempt to manage things is going to be great. And to see Elko design a defense to go up against Trevor Lawrence and the amount of talent that Clemson has on that side of the football, that's going to be fun to watch. So people should remember and keep in mind that one of the main reasons that this game is very appealing is that you're dealing with some of the best coaches in college football. And that's not just the head coaches. I'm talking about coordinators, assistants. I'm talking from the top of those staffs all the way down. You're dealing with some of the best when it comes to college football coaches.
Well, I think even some Clemson fans are scratching their heads at why this game is a 17 to 19 point, why Clemson's a 17 to 19 point favorite. What's your best guess on that?
That Clemson has a bushel of athletic freak shows on offense that Vegas probably doesn't think anybody's going to have an answer for all year. I mean, they've got the best quarterback in college football. They have, at absolute worst, the second best group of wide receivers. And I think you could literally flip a coin between Clemson and Alabama's group of wide receivers, and it's not like you're going to go wrong with either guy. We already have seen what Travis Etienne is going to be capable of this year. And I think they're more physical up front. I mean, I think the middle of that offensive line may be as physical and maybe as talented as it's been under this Dabo run. And listen, Mitch Hyatt played a lot of really good football, and he was a big loss, and he was very experienced. But I don't think that that's going to have near the impact on this Clemson offensive line that some people, who pick up a Field Steel magazine might believe that it is. I think the offensive line very well could end up being a strength for this football team. I mean, I had them in my top 5 offensive lines heading into this season. I had Georgia 1, I had Oregon 2, and I had Clemson 3. So I really think a lot of this Clemson offensive line, and I think watching that group against Matabike and Bobby Brown and Michael Clemens, that's going to be a very intriguing matchup, because I think if you're going to, it doesn't even come like I don't think that there's a lot of teams, Larry, that are going to be able to hit Trevor Lawrence and really bother him that much. He's too big of a kid. I mean, he's like a damn small forward out there playing quarterback. So I don't know if hitting him as far as like making him go to the injury tent or seeing him get up real slow, I don't think you're going to impact him that way. But getting to him, making him move, making him throw off platform, hitting him while he's throwing the ball, I think that's one of the only ways that you're really going to force errant passes from him and force him to not be accurate. And that's what you're going to have to do to win this game. Because some of those throws down the field are going to take time. And if they're going to plan on that offensive line giving him time, you're going to need some guys up front to either make him move, make him change his arm angle, or take some sort of a hit while he's throwing the ball to force that football to be inaccurate and to not give those receivers a real chance to be able to go up and make a play.
It's interesting you mentioned the offensive line. That was what I walked away from the Georgia Tech game most impressed with, not just the gaudy rushing yards, but the way they looked and how – I mean, I know Georgia Tech's not Alabama's defensive front, but those running backs weren't being touched until 5 yards behind, beyond the line of scrimmage. It just looked. I mean, they became a different offensive line last year when Gage Cervinka took over at right guard, which is more of a natural spot for him. And now you got Jackson Carman on the left side, who has more, I guess, athletic, freaky upside than Mitch Hyatt did. Then John Simpson, left guard, NFL guy. And then on the right side, Tremaine Ankrum. And then behind, as a backup, you have Matt Bockhorst, who I think is going to be a really good offensive lineman in time. So it does seem like they are going to be more physical, which doesn't really make sense on paper after you lose Hyatt and Falcinelli.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Simpson. I agree with you that he's an NFL guy. I think when this run began and when Chad was running the offense, it was very much a slide protection, hinge protection, sort of turn and sift up to the second level. It was just creating space. And creating space by forcing defenders out of alignment or forcing them to make a decision with some sort of an option play, be it a zone read, be it an RPO, be it some sort of a quick throw, be it something that could happen out in the flat. And now I think this is a group that can move people. And I agree, you started to see it towards the end of last year. And, I mean, the problem with last year's group was they were inconsistent. And it's one of the reasons that I thought they were going to get owned in the national championship game. Because, I mean, hell, just go turn the Syracuse game on last year. They didn't play well the first 3.5 quarters. And then all of a sudden it's like literally this light switch goes on and they look like 95 Nebraska for 3 drives. And you're just like, how do you go from that to that? And so I saw that from a game-to-game, series-to-series, week-to-week basis. And then I watched Quinnen Williams and Raekwon Davis and LeBron Ray and Anthony Jennings, and I'm thinking, I don't know which one's going to show up, but I know that Bama D-line showed up every week. So I'm going to lean towards them having the advantage. And obviously it didn't play out that way. But this is a different group. And when you can be a team that can go north and south and you can block the second level with movement and then have the guys outside. See, I think when this whole thing started, it was live or die on the perimeter. And if you stole some stuff between the tackles with Kelly or Deshaun or whoever, like some sort of a draw play, then that was nice. It was nice to have, not need to have. Well, now this is a team that I think can be one that wins in between the tackles from a need to have basis. Like that can be initially who they are. And that's dangerous, man, because when your safeties have to scream down to the box to play that, and with those receivers on the outside, I literally don't know how you defend it. It all comes down at that point in time to Trevor Lawrence making the right decision. And even when he makes the wrong decision, he's got some guys that are just going to make him right anyway. And I'm pretty confident he can make the right decision the majority of the time. So that's why I'm so excited for this game, because I love Coach Elko. I think he is a masterful game planner. I think he has a better grasp on football holistically than maybe any defensive coordinator I've ever talked to. I don't think he coaches the game for one specific matchup or one specific series. Like he does a better job of illustrating what everything means. And I think that's why his players react to it extremely well. I think he's really good at saying, hey, we're going to bring pressure from this side in this field position against this look because of this. Whereas a lot of coaches will just say, hey, man, we're inside the 20 left tackle, we're bringing pressure. And that's that. Well, that lack of conceptual football knowledge can get you in trouble sometimes. And that doesn't allow players to usually adjust on their own. When you can conceptualize everything and help everyone understand the hows and whys of what you're doing, that's when guys start to make their own adjustments. And that's when I think you sort of begin to go to the next level. So I think it's going to be a fun matchup to watch. I think that one decides the game, because I do think A&M will move the ball. I think Kellen Mond has improved from last year. I think their group of receivers is elite. And do they have some holes? Yeah, they might not be as talented at tailback, but I think they have 2 good ones. And the offensive line, losing Eric McCoy hurt, they may be more talented across the board up front, but they're younger and they're a little bit less experienced. So, I mean, that's obviously not something that you want to lean on. That's not necessarily a plus, but I think that Clemson offense against this A&M defense is going to be a lot of fun to watch.
You guys did your homework for that Texas State game. It was very informative watching the broadcast, and one of the things that really stood out was the development of Mon and how his deep balls look so good, just on the money, on the run, from the pocket, whatever. And you guys were saying that his lower body strength and then mechanics, altering those, have allowed him to be a much better down the field thrower. Can you maybe expand on that a little bit?
Sure. Jimbo described it as his upper body is much more violent and his lower body is much more calm this season. And they sort of went back to the drawing board and put a lot of emphasis on his core and his core strength. And I think what they did by doing that was made him less reliant on arm velocity to generate a lot of power on the football. So he now, because I asked Jimbo a question, when you study Mond, it's weird. Like, you can see him in that LSU game just rocket a ball over the middle of the field into the end zone. And then you can kind of see him throw this little 10-yard out to the tight end. And his arm, it looks like his arm is moving the same speed. And it's just like, how can a guy throw a ball 50 miles an hour and 20 miles an hour, and it looks like his arm's doing the exact same thing? And Jimbo described it as that's his core. And he is starting to understand not only how to use his lower body, but how to use his core to generate power. Well, when he can do that, obviously when he's on the run, he's still able to generate a lot of velocity on the football because he doesn't have to rely on his lower body because his lower body's not set. And he made 3 throws in that game that, honestly, they are as good as any throws I've ever seen. The one in the back of the end zone, he's stepping up in the pocket and he just has to flip that ball. It couldn't be placed any better. The one down the left sideline where Courtney Davis catches it and goes out of bounds on the one. Literally, he's on the run, running left, making that throw. And it's as accurate of a ball as you'll see. So I think he's actually improved over what he was a season ago. And he has been a guy, to me, that has done an excellent job of always keeping his eyes down the field when he begins to leave the pocket. But he'll make that decision quick. It's boom, and he decides to run. He's not a guy that really wastes a lot of time before he decides to leave. But as he's making that decision, his eyes are always downfield. And I think that's where he catches a lot of defenses, is he can make those decisions extremely late when it looks like he may leave, or a defender, a corner, a safety, a linebacker, a defensive end. They may see that he has a lane to be able to leave, and he can just pop that ball out real quick, and he can do it in an accurate fashion. And then on top of that, he's a pretty physical dude. He put on like 12 pounds, and I think he said he played last year at like 205. He's playing at like 217, 218, something like that right now. So durability has never been an issue with him. Physicality, running the football, has never been an issue with him. So, he's taken a couple aspects of it, and A&M, I think, is going to add a lot this year. I think they already had an expansive playbook, and I think they're going to actually add to it. So, he's a guy that's fun to watch. He's got some interesting targets to throw the football to. He's got, he's really right a lot of the time, but just like Trevor, he's got a couple guys that can make him right even when he's wrong.
One of the big concerns, it would appear to me, for A&M is that offensive line. Corbin, man, he looks like a really good running back, but didn't have a whole lot of room to run against Texas State. And then Mon was hit, I think, far more often than Jimbo wanted, as he indicated in his, I guess, halftime conversation with you. How are they going to handle not just Clemson's talent on the defensive line, but also all those unpredictable A-gap blitzes and the pressures that Venables likes to draw up?
Yeah, those pressure packages are going to be tough. And if there's one advantage right off the bat that I think of, it would be Glenn Beal at tight end. You got a guy that's 265, 270. He is your old school. He is a big physical. He kind of reminds me of Dwayne Allen a little bit. He's not one of these taller, leaner, power forward, hybrid flex tight end guys. Like he can line up next to the tackle and he can block. I think he may be big in protection. I think Tegan Baldry may be big in protection. He's actually a former walk-on offensive lineman that's playing fullback now. They had a really good one last year in Cullen Gillespie, and he's gone. He wore number 12 last year. He was a big-time player for them. Actually got drafted by the Texans. And Baldry may be a guy they have to rely on as well to just add a little bit of extra protection. But you're talking about a true freshman at right guard that's going to be starting his first road game in a pretty crazy environment. So that's a tough ask. I think they've got good depth at center, but they like Dan Moore at left tackle. They like Carson Green at right tackle, but those guys are going to have their hands full. And it's like you said, not just from a talent perspective, but schematically, what are they going to see from the pressure package standpoint? Anytime you get a guy like Isaiah Simmons who can play the run but has the speed to rush off the edge and can move around and do different things, that can be a problem. So I think that if there was a big concern for me going into this game, that would be it. But obviously, Clemson's D-line's not what they were a year ago. And that's one of the reasons I think A&M can sort of keep this game close is that you're offsetting areas that maybe you have a little more uncertainties in than you do a lot of other spots on your team.
Yeah, we're on one hand, I'm like, how is A&M going to block these guys and deal with those pressure packages? On the other, like all those bunch formations that Jimbo likes to use, man, they gave Clemson fits last year. And now you take an inexperienced defensive line, inexperienced linebacker. Well, not inexperienced. Well, yeah, inexperienced. Skalski and Chad Smith are starting for the first time. And then the safeties, how are they going to handle all that window dressing, I guess, that Jimbo likes to throw out there? What are your thoughts on that?
We spent all that time talking about, T. Higgins and Justin Ross and Rogers and what's the A&M secondary going to do to them. Maybe it's the same thing on the other end. Maybe this game legitimately comes down to both groups of DBs and how they play, because you got some experience on the back end for Clemson, and maybe it comes down to 4 or 5 jump balls the other way this year, and 4 or 5 balls down the field of, do those Clemson DBs make the plays, or does Kendrick Rogers or Jamon Osborne or Courtney Davis make those plays? So, I think the experience obviously is going to help them, but I think Jimbo, it's like I told you before, they're going to move the ball. Kellen Mond's too good. That group of receivers are too good. They're talented enough at tailback and tight end. A&M will move the ball. It's going to happen. Now, how many points they put on the board, I don't know. And then and some of that depends too on how Clemson wants to scheme it up. Do you want to continuously give them things underneath and try to force them to just pick you apart and work and work and work, or are you going to give them some of those one-on-ones? And when they get them, do they take them? So that's just part of this whole matchup that I find very intriguing, because I think there's some areas that are strength on strength, there are some that are weakness on weakness, and it's more question on question than necessarily weakness. But there are areas of concern versus areas of concern. There's strength on strength, and then there's strength on areas of concern when you're talking about Clemson on offense and that A&M secondary.
Got an early prediction for us?
Man, I haven't picked this game yet, so I don't really know. But
that's fine.
I'll be perfectly honest with you. I'm leaning A&M right now.
Straight up.
I think A&M can win this game straight up. I think the defensive line is good enough, and I think that they can cause some problems. But before I officially say that, yes, I think that's going to happen, I will refer back to my national championship game pick and probably say that I should just wait this out a few more days before I give an official prediction. But I will stick with this. A&M will make this game very, very competitive, and I think it will be one of the most enjoyable games of this college football season.
Full disclosure, I was with you going into the national championship game. Probably for the reasons that you had. Clemson's offensive line not being able to block Alabama. Didn't you you had a tweet or something the day of the game or something and got a bunch? I know Clemson
couple
fans.
Weeks after, I'm not going back into that.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll save save that for another day or another year, maybe.
I've had enough. I've had enough hate from that. I mean, I got coworkers, family members, talking junk to me on Twitter. So I've had enough of that. I'm not touching that.
Okay, we won't dredge that back up. Cole Cubelic, man, awesome. You did great work, and really appreciate your time as always. We'll check back in with you for the podcast at least, I guess, a year from now.
Make it early in the season so I know I can join you. So,
Sounds good,
anytime
man.
for you, Larry. I always appreciate it, man.
Thank you, sir. Over the year we've been doing the Dubcast, we've developed a great relationship with the folks over at the Abernathy Boutique Hotel. In addition to being a great meeting spot for our interviews we conduct with local personalities, it's also a fantastic place to stay. The Abernathy is rolling out a loyalty savings program for 2019. After your third stay, you'll automatically be rewarded with an exclusive offer. It can be applied to future reservations for the remainder of the year. 15% off rooms, 15% off food and beverage at Taps Bar and Cafe. Learn more at theabernathy.com. Big supporter of the Clemson Dubcast is Harris Flooring America. Based in Anderson, South Carolina, Harris Flooring has been instrumental in a lot of the facilities transformation you've seen on Clemson's campus lately. From the Allen Reeves Center to the McFadden Building to Memorial Stadium to the Neary Center, family owned and operated since 1947. The owner, Scott Junkins, big Clemson guy. Harris Flooring is just as good inside the home and the residential realm as they are with the larger scale commercial stuff. Give them a call, 864-642-6183, or online at flooringamerica-anderson.com. Okay, joined by Corey Clark, longtime chronicler of Florida State football, currently for warchant.com. Thanks for joining us, man.
I appreciate you having me, man. It must be fun to cover like a winning program, a team that wins games and has numbers by its name. That's probably pretty cool.
Man, I saw, I guess, you know how the YouTube, you have YouTube suggestions or whatever. Mm-hmm. And there was one that had the faces of a video that had the faces. I don't know who came up with it, but it had the faces of Taggart, Muschamp, and Jeremy Pruitt, and saying, should they be fired? Right now. And I'm like, yep, we're a week into the season. A lot changes with just one game in a lot of cases. But I'm not shattered that I don't have to cover teams that are drawing the complete rancor of their fan bases.
Yeah, and I mean, you've lived that too, obviously. It's not, and you've lived it. Like, you've lived the life of fan bases that are not spoiled. That's not the right word, but just wanting. You're wanting more, and they're always upset, and they're always complaining. And then you've gone to the other highs. Well, I have too. I covered the team that was won 29 straight games, and now I'm covering a team that is they're now 10-14 in their last 24 games against FBS competition. They're 10-14. So it's not a lot of fun. I didn't think this was going to happen. I covered it a little bit at the end of Bobby's tenure, and I didn't think it was going to devolve back into this so quickly, and it has, and it's pretty bizarre. Okay, so I did not watch the game Saturday when it was happening, had other things going on, but I'm reading about it Sunday, and I'm like, you know what, I don't understand what all this hysteria is about. I knew they lost, I gave up 18-point lead twice, but you see they lose by 5 to a good, Boise State's always good. Mm-hmm. Boise State team, and I see that their offense actually got to the end zone a few times, and I'm thinking, what's the big deal here, But then yesterday I sat down and watched the game. More important, I watched the second half of that game, and it was ugly, just ugly in so many ways. The column, the headline of your column is from the game. Was how to be angry and rational at the same time about brutal loss. So I'm wondering what was going through your mind as you're not only trying to process what you're watching, but process and how to react to what you watched. That had to be one of the more complicated sort of, I guess, takeaways, a general takeaway of from a column you ever had. Oh, absolutely. And I write that. Like, I was in the post-game press conference and didn't have anything to ask because I didn't really care about any of the answers. Like, okay, we saw what happened. You had a 31-13 lead, and then the offense just nosedived, and the defense just was abysmal. And the question is, where do you go from here? Well, first off, and so I was like, you can't tell me where you're going to go from here. You can't tell me that you believe this team is different and it's going to handle adversity better. You have to prove it now. You can't just say we're different than we were last year. We can handle this stuff better, because nobody believes you. And I'm not even sure the players believe it, because the players, again, like I mentioned, Jay, they've never experienced any type of real success. So what happened in that game was just the most bizarre thing. I mean, they scored on their first 5 possessions, 4 touchdowns and a field goal, and their field goal came after they had a 1st and goal at the 1. Like they threw a 50-yard pass that got caught at the 1-yard line and only kicked a field goal from there. But what I'm saying is they were really close to having 5 touchdowns on 5 straight possessions. Man, they didn't score 5 touchdowns in a month last season. So it was insane to watch. And you're like, oh my goodness, this is Florida State's. I was never close to this saying Florida State is back, because I was watching the defense play, and the defense was getting kind of lucky to hold into some field goals. But with that offense, you're like, okay, man, they're gonna be able to really outscore some teams, and they're gonna figure out how to win games against good teams. And this could be an 8 or 9 win season. I mean, I guess it still could, but at that time, you're like, okay, this could be an 8 or 9 win team. They could maybe give not Clemson, but every other team on the schedule real problems. And then the second half happened, and what you see is a team that just does not. And it's such a nebulous thing to say. It's a phrase. I hate saying it, but they just don't know how to win. You know, they're up 31-19. Marvin Wilson, who's the best player on the team, causes a fumble. They get the ball. They immediately go down to the Boise 30-yard line. Cam Akers has a nice run. If they score on this run, on this drive, they're up 38-19 late in the third quarter against a team from Idaho in 100-degree heat, with a freshman quarterback. I think that team gives up. I don't want to say gives up, but I think they feel like, okay, that's done. We're 19 points down. We're 3 touchdowns down. And I think they have a chance to win that game kind of comfortably. But what bad teams do, are teams that aren't used to winning, they fumble. And Cam Akers fumbles, it gives them the ball right back. 2 possessions later, Boise State's going in to take the lead. Florida State causes a fumble at their own 3-yard line. They have 2 guys there, nobody else in the picture, to pick it up. One of them takes it away from the other one. They kick it around. Boise State recovers at the 4 and scores 2 plays later. That's just that's just what teams that don't know how to win do. So you saw that, and that's where I think all the hand wringing comes from. Is they looked so much better this game, Larry, than they did last season opener against Virginia Tech. That was impossibly bad. They scored 3 points. They were never really in the game offensively. This Boise State's a good team. There's no shame in losing to Boise State by 5 points. The problem is that you were up by 18. You're at home. You're playing a true freshman quarterback. You give up 38 first downs and 620 yards of offense to a true freshman quarterback in your home stadium. And when the going got tough, you completely melted. And Florida State fans have been seeing that now for, better part of 2.5 years.
Melted, literally, because
sure.
How to explain? Oh, I guess you can explain it by saying Florida State's defense was on the field for so long, but still, a team from Idaho comes in and looks very well conditioned the entire game, and then meanwhile in the second half, Florida State's players are dropping like flies, cramping up. And then just their body language, they're not playing as hard. They're obviously just gassed, which happens when it's 100 degrees. But how can they not be prepared for that?
Yeah, I think part of it, I just don't think you're prepared for 108 snaps. And they tried from the jump they played 30 guys on defense. They played 27 guys at least 10 plays. So they tried to substitute guys in. But there's a pretty substantial drop-off in some of those positions, as you can imagine, between like a Marvin Wilson and who his backup is. And Marvin Wilson played 69 snaps. Wow. Which is a huge number for a 320-pound defensive lineman. He played 69 snaps. Well, that means he was on the bench for 40 plays. That's more than half a game for some teams. So I just think it was more than that. I think a little bit was made too much of that. I just think that any team, if they're out there for 108 plays in that heat, and it was brutal. There's a reason they don't schedule noon games in Tallahassee. It was the South in general, but it's just a different kind of heat, and it was brutal. And meanwhile, as you know, it's easier for the Boise State defense was never on the field in the second half. I think Florida State ran 21 plays in the second half, and they had 5 3-and-outs. They had 3 first downs total in the second half. They only had the ball for 19 minutes the entire game. So Boise State's defense was fresh in the second half. They didn't have, I think they played 13 guys more than 10 plays. Like they just stayed with their starters because they didn't have to. Meanwhile, Florida State's having to sub in like crazy because they can't get. And one thing, the offense was a problem, obviously. They had 5 3-and-outs. They didn't do anything in the second half. So the defense was on the field the whole second half. Like I legitimately think it was like 23 minutes of the half. But you're allowed to get a third down stop. Boise State had 10 third down conversions. Florida State had 1. There's your ball game, man. And I think we know that the money down in football is third down. That's where the most pressure is. That's when you try to get off the field. That's when you have to keep a drive alive. And these kids, so far in their careers, have never really responded to pressure well. And that showed again on Saturday. I just don't think they handled it well. But, it's not like the season's over. Again, if you look at it if you take a step back and just look at it from the macro perspective of last year you lost whatever it was, 23-3 in your opener to Virginia Tech, who wasn't a good team last year. And then every other loss, in almost every other loss, well, really, your next 5 losses were all complete blowouts. Well, this year you lost to a pretty good team by 5 points and you had an 18-point lead. So, I know it's baby steps, and those are small, that's a moral victory. You don't get moral victories at Florida State, but they did improve. They did look better. It was a better product than what we saw last year. But does that matter now? He's 5-8. How much does that matter that it's a better product when they're still losing games?
And even in the first half, when things were going great, mostly, Boise they would run up the middle, and the running back is not touched until he's 15 yards behind beyond the line of scrimmage. What was that? Just poor alignment, gap control? It didn't look like they were getting blown off the ball. Were they just misaligned on some of those runs?
Well, that's what Willie said after on Monday. He said it was a lot of alignment issues, which again, it's like, okay, well, and I asked him, was that happening in practice? And he goes, well, if it was happening in practice, you wouldn't have seen it in a game. And I'm not quite sure what that means. I think the inference there is if they'd have seen it in practice, they would have fixed it, and it wouldn't have happened now. But then why did it happen in the game if it wasn't happening in practice? They switched to a mainly 3-4 this year. Florida State's never been a 3-4. They had some principles with Jeremy Pruitt in 2013, but mostly they've always been 4-3, and they've recruited for a 4-3. And I talked to Travis Johnson, who was an All-American at Florida State about 15, 16 years ago, first-round pick. And he talked about, because he played he was a great defensive tackle in college, and then in the pros he was asked to be a 3-4 defensive lineman. And he said, look, it's completely different. It's a completely different way. Florida State defensive tackles are coached to attack, to get by their man and get in the backfield. Well, in a 3-4, man, sometimes if you make a move and get to the right of a lineman, he's perfectly happy just pushing you that way. They want you to get out of the gap. And I just think that happened a good bit with guys that aren't used to playing it, and their linebackers aren't very good. At least they haven't proven to be any good. And they don't trigger. They don't come downhill. They're not physical. You have Jaden Woodby, who came in as a 5-star safety, playing linebacker. You have Janarius Robinson, who's always been a defensive end. He's playing one of the linebacker spots. Josh Kando is playing one of the linebacker spots. They're standing up, and they're just not used to this. And it showed. 38 first downs and 620 yards is an embarrassment. And Boise State had 2 touchdowns taken off the board. Or they could have had, in the mid-50s or close to 60 points.
I'll tell you this, just my observations, and tell me what you think. I like James Blackman, how far he's come. He was throwing some nice balls. He has developed, it seems, pretty substantially. I like Cam Akers, obviously, and then the guy behind him, LeBourne, is that it?
LeBourne, yeah, LeBourne.
Receivers, you got some good receivers, of course. The offensive line, though not good, better than last year. They can put up some points this year if, and I'm assuming this is the big if down there, if the team doesn't go into the tank. Is that? Yeah. Do you agree with this?
Absolutely. That's why I think, right after the game, I was talking with Irish Affel, who also works at War Chant. We were doing a post-game video. Always fun to wrap up at 4:30 when it's 100 degrees and you just watch the team that you cover blow an 18-point lead. People love clicking on those videos. But anyway, and he was saying that this was a big week for Willie and this was a big week for Kendall Briles to show that they could rebound from a disappointing loss and show that this year was going to not be different. And I corrected him right away and said, I don't know if this week matters at all. Like, there's nothing you can do against Louisiana Monroe that's going to make anybody feel any better about anything. It's the at Virginia game the week after that matters. But as this week has gone on, I think I've kind of reversed course on that. Last year, I don't know if you remember, why would you? But after the Virginia Tech game, they played Sanford the next Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
And they were down in the fourth quarter. They had to have a late touchdown drive, and then Levante Taylor had a pick six with like 2 minutes to go to ice that game, or they would have lost to Sanford. So in that regard, I do think this week is important. I think if they go out and handle business, I know it's Louisiana Monroe, but if they go and look good again offensively and actually make some improvements defensively and can win by 35 or 38 points, I think that's a good sign. Because if they don't, if they struggle again, if they're trailing in the third or fourth quarter, if they're in a game in the second half against a team that's completely outmanned, man, you might punt on this season. Like, that will be an awful sign. And that's what you worry about when you going back to your original question. How are the players going to react to this? Are they going to, like, how are the defensive players reacting to this at all? Like, these guys were recruited by everybody, and they're on a team that's giving up 620 yards and 36 points. How are they going to be in film study? How are they going to be in practice? Do they trust their coaches? Because if they don't trust their coaches, it's a wrap. They're not going to play hard. They're not going to try. It's just human nature. So how much are they really bought into this? Is what I'm really interested in seeing, because you're right, man. Even 2016, it went off the or 17. I'm sorry. Once Francois got hurt, that went off the rails. Last year, they lose to Virginia Tech, and it's like the light was just turned out on the team. And they had some moments. They almost beat Miami. They beat BC on a late touchdown, fine. But the light, it went off the rails almost completely last year too. Is it in this team's DNA to do it again? Can they flip it? Can they stop just completely tanking when things go bad? Can they show that they can handle adversity? Because nobody on this team, not one person on this roster, has ever really showed that they can handle adversity at the college level, football-wise anyway.
I was talking to David Hale last week of ESPN, and he had gotten some grief from FSU fans for saying, pump the brakes on all this talk that there's going to be this, major dramatic turnaround. And last week, we were talking, about the Kendall Browse arrival, and I was just saying from my experience or from what I've seen, that people, fans, whoever, often view up-tempo offense as this panacea that's going to just cure everything. And what I said last week was, tempo offense doesn't mean anything if you're going 3 and out every drive.
Right.
And so we certainly saw that from Florida State in the second half last week. What was your take on sort of the culture change on offense going into the season, and how was that, if at all, changed based on what you saw over 60 minutes Saturday?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at it, when you step back again and take the macro view of, hey, 31 points, 425 yards, they might have done that once all of last season, and heck, he did that essentially in a half. So you see the positive, you see the ceiling of how good this thing can be. Unfortunately, the second half also happened, and that was about as bad as anything we saw all last season. So the culture change, I do think they're going to be better. They are going to be better coached. More than anything, you have an offensive coordinator working with an O-line coach that he trusts and knows. Randy Clements has worked with Briles for decades and knows exactly how this offense is run and what he wants. Last year, you had Taggart with Walt Bell, who was the quote-unquote offensive coordinator but didn't call plays, and then Greg Fry was the offensive line coach. None of these people had ever worked together, and it was a mishmash, and it was awful. It was a disaster. Florida State's biggest problem, even after what I saw on Saturday, I still think, well, no, maybe I wouldn't go that far, but a huge issue on this team is still the offensive line. It didn't all of a sudden get good. It might end up being mediocre to okay, but it's never going to be good. Not this collection of guys, not this year. So, but they were serviceable enough that the Florida State offense could do a lot of what it wanted to do. Last year, it couldn't do anything. It just couldn't do anything. So that's what I think is the biggest culture change, is that you have an offensive line, or just a change in general. You have an offensive line that you can trust not to get completely run over and annihilated. that you also have an offensive line coach that understands what the OC wants. The OC understands what the offensive line coach can produce and what they have. And what Kendall Brown said, something I thought that was interesting today. This morning, he's like, look, we had a lot of problems on third down in the second half because we weren't doing well on first and second down. And when we're in third and predictable, we can get exposed up front, which is true. I mean, that's the truth. I mean, he's being honest, but he knows what they have up front, or more to the point, what they don't have. So that's always going to be an issue. But I do think that it's going to be better. It's as long as it can be serviceable. I think this offense can average somewhere around that 31, 32, 33 points this year. Some days, and some games they'll have in the mid 40s, I think. Probably not in Death Valley in a couple months, but in other games they might have a chance to put up 40, 45 points because they do have, like you said, a bunch of skill position players. But the overall effect on the team, how much better is Florida State going to be with a great offense? Okay, it should be better, obviously. Not a great offense, a good, competent offense. It'll be better. But what's the takeaway from the defensive side of the ball? Because you are awful on defense. And I'm not saying they're awful players, but one game, I know it's a small sample size, but holy moly. So if you're going to be this bad on defense, how does it help to put those guys out there for 40 minutes a game? But at the same token, if the only way you can manage to score on offense is to use tempo, because you can't. It's not like you can just say, all right, we're just going to shove this down your throats. Shove the ball down your throats. You can't stop us. I mean, they got to go fast. That's the one positive. One of the positives of this offense is you don't have to have a great offensive line if you're running tempo and you got the other team tired and on its heels. So that's one of the reasons that Browse likes it with this group in particular. So I think you're, robbing Peter to pay Paul. But I don't know what ends up working for Florida State. I don't know if it can work if you have a defense that bad. But I do think the offense will be better, and if they lose games, at least the games won't be 38-6. They might be, 38-31 or 36-31 like we saw on Saturday.
I think it can work in the context of 8-4, perhaps. I mean, you got Louisville at home, NC State at home, at Wake Forest, Syracuse is at home, Miami at home, at Boston College, and then you said at Virginia in a couple of weeks, at Florida. I mean, that style of offense gives you a chance, at least.
Sure.
But you would certainly. Well, I don't know. Would you rather have a really good ball control to keep the defense off the field? I would rather have points because it makes things more exciting and better. I guess is a better fit for those offensive players than. And if
your defense is going to be bad anyway. Like it might not matter. You might have the defense. You might be as rested as you could possibly be on that side of the ball, and it just might not matter. So yeah, I know what I said, 3 minutes ago, but it's true, man. You got to do whatever it takes to score points. You just got to hope you can outscore people. It didn't work, but it didn't work mainly because the offense just completely fell off a cliff in the second half. But they had 31 points and 358 yards in the first half,
and finished with what 421.
420. Yeah, they had 68 yards in the second half. I mean, 358 to 68.
Oh, that's hard to do.
That's crazy. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that. In Briles, it was the fourth time in Briles' career that he's been shut out in a half.
Wow.
Ever. Yeah, it happened in game one.
The most startling thing to me offensively was that moment in the third quarter. I forgot whether Boise had pulled within 4 or whatever or gone ahead. Florida State's defense was clearly gassed. And then Florida State or Briles the offense responds by first down, deep shot, second down, deep shot, both incomplete.
Right.
I could not wrap my mind around the logic of that. Was that the call, or was that a bad read by Blackman, or what?
No, to me. No, it definitely wasn't the call. And you could see, I could see Briles on the sideline after the second one telling Blackman to calm down. Mm-hmm. Like, I think what it was a quarterback that was panicking, an offense that was panicking, and it's like, man, I'm just gonna, maybe I'll get lucky. Almost like, and obviously not a Hail Mary, but man, we need something right. I'm just gonna take a shot. Hopefully we can make a play, because I don't want to have to try to read the middle of the field. I'm just going to throw it up. Hopefully my guy can make a play and we can get this thing going again, which was really disconcerting to see. But that's what that was. That wasn't Briles saying, all right, let's get it all back right here. That was Blackman I think, not wanting to scan the field, not wanting to read it, and just throwing it up for grabs and hoping this guy makes a play. Because they were panicking. And it's not just Blackman. They all were. They all started to panic because that's what happens when you're used to bad things happening to you. You're like, oh, we can't, you get tight. And when you get tight, you just, you throw it up for grabs and hope. It's like a team that in basketball that's in the midst of getting a run on it, and it just starts chucking threes. You know what I mean? Just okay, we need a three, and they just keep missing and keep missing. It just that's it, and it keeps exacerbating itself. That's what I think happened there. But yeah, that was right when Boise had cut it to 31-26, maybe. Blackman just and he's thrown it to the guy. They have one guy that they should throw 4 or 5 deep balls to every game, and it's Torian Terry. And he was throwing it to these other guys. They weren't even shots to Terry. So yeah, it was just to me it was just a bit of panic and a bit of rattle. For a guy that, has only started, that was only his second start in the last 14 months.
If you run a business that conducts credit card transactions with customers, you got to learn about Tandem Payment. Credit card processing company has offices throughout the Southeast, but the one in Greenville in the upstate, headed up by a 2005 Clemson grad. Tandem's technology allows business owners to offset their credit card processing costs by applying a small customer service charge to each sale they make. Tandem has an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau and was awarded the Better Business Integrity Award in 2013. Check them out at tandempayment.com. Quick word about Uptown Realty LLC, headed up by Patrick Enzer, former sports writer who decided to get into the real estate game. Uptown Realty, locally owned and operated out of Sumter, but they serve the Eastern Midlands and PD area with the buying and selling of homes, commercial properties, and land. They also offer affordable new housing in the mid-130,000s from a local custom builder. Patrick is the sole owner and broker in charge. Grew up in Anderson, going to Clemson games, been in Sumter for 15 years, loyal Tiger Illustrated subscriber, loyal Dubcast listener. Website is uptownrealtysc.com. So the turnout for the game, not good, even though the tickets were $10 a pop or whatever. And then after halftime, holy Moses, the floodgates open on people leaving. Was that because people thought it was over, or they were just too hot, or what?
No, it was definitely too hot. And, the crowd was about as well as I thought it would, about as good as I thought it would, or could have been, it's such late notice, 2-day notice to have 51,000. I thought it was pretty impressive. I also thought it was cool that the Boise State fans got there so early, because it was first come, first serve as general admission. So the Boise State fans got there early enough to have the area right behind, where they put Clemson fans at Doak. Well, they couldn't do that with Boise, so they were right behind the bench on the 50 on their sideline. So I thought that was pretty cool. But yeah, no, it was actually my girlfriend was at the game, and her friends left at halftime. Said she'd never been hotter in her life. It's just, you know how it is, man, when you're sitting in the metal bleachers, and it's 100, it's like, I think it was 104 on the field. So I don't know what it would be like on these cement metal bleachers, but yeah, it wasn't a great look. I would never, from the comfort of my AC press box, I was actually a little cold. I had to go get a sweater. They keep it pretty cold in the Doak press box. I would never bemoan people leaving when it's 1,000 degrees. But yeah, they all, I mean, literally half the crowd left, maybe more than that. It was a home field advantage in the first half. And in the second half, yeah, it was not at all. It was just half the crowd left. You know, and I asked somebody about that. Okay, do you think this, if this was 2014, Wake Forest or Notre Dame or anybody, just a normal home game in 2014, would all these people left? And yeah, the answer was probably not. I mean, the students bounced, everybody bounced, and I know it was hot, but it was also a 12-point game against Boise State. You know, it wasn't like you were playing Louisiana Monroe. And yeah, half the crowd was like, "I'm done. I can't do this anymore."
Corey, I have covered mediocre and some bad teams, but I've never covered a free fall like this, from national championship in 13, playoff in 14, to now the stat that you recited. What did you say, 10 and 14?
Yeah, they're 12 and 14 in their last 26 overall, but 2 of those wins were over Delaware State, Samford. So in their last 24 FBS games, they're 10 and 14. What
is this like as a writer? I mean, you have to come up with ideas, obviously. That's your trade. And then in sort of dealing with subscribers, dealing with fans, like, can you describe what this is like?
Yeah, it's been surreal. I mean, you never would have thought this was coming. Now, I didn't think Jimbo was Nick Saban. I didn't necessarily think he was going to have it steady cruising for a decade. But I didn't see it being this precipitous a fall and so quickly. They played for not only did they play they get in the playoff in 14, but in 2015, they won, even without Jameis, they won their first 6 games, I think, or 7 games. And then they lost on the kick at Georgia Tech when it was blocked. And it's like from that moment on, it was like some invincibility had been chipped away. And since then, I know it's different players now, but I would say since that game, they've 20 losses, 22 losses since then. It's just you could see it coming a little bit with Jimbo, obviously. Even in 16, I think Dalvin saved them a good bit. A pretty easy schedule saved them. But in that 16 season, even though they ended up winning the Orange Bowl kind of in the last few seconds, they got embarrassed by Louisville. They got down, really embarrassed by Louisville, like 63-20 embarrassed. And then the next week, they're down 21-0 at home to North Carolina. And they end up losing that game as well. And they rallied a little bit after that, but Jimbo was having them sign promissory notes to try hard. And that was in 16. So you could already see that the things were trending in the wrong direction. And then 17 happened, and it's just I would have never believed that it could get this bad this quickly. Florida State had never not been to a bowl. And then here we are, 5 years after a national championship, they're not playing in a bowl game. And it's weird. It's hard to write because nobody wants to read features about Cam Akers, really. You know what I mean? Even if he's having a great year, it's like, all right, well, who cares? We're 5-7, 5-8. Great. He's a good kid. Okay, we're 5-8. Awesome. Tamorrion Terry's going to be an NFL first or second round pick. Awesome. We're 5-8. What does that matter? That's kind of the mindset. And when you're at a place like Florida State or obviously Clemson, this isn't something that people react well to. They're not understanding. They're not patient. They don't want to say, okay, give them time. They want quick fixes and they want it now. And so, there's a lot. You know what? There was a friend that asked me, I went to a bar on Saturday night after the game. We're all drowning our sorrows just to get out of the heat. A couple bar fights. It's fun. It's Tallahassee on a Saturday night. Somebody asked me what percentage of Florida State fans, if Urban Meyer right now said he wanted to come to Florida State and coach, what percentage of Florida State fans would say yes? And my 2 friends that were next to me said 100%. And I'm like, I don't know about that. I think it's probably, they're like, no, 100%. That's where Florida State fans are right now. They would go with Urban Meyer to coach their team if it meant winning football games again. And I think by and large, most Florida State fans really do like Willie Taggart as a person. He's a very likable person. They do not like him as a football coach. He has not given them reason to like him as a football coach. And there's a lot of doom and gloom in the sense of, will it ever get back to what it was? Can it get back to what it was? Some people, I couldn't even put a percentage on the fan base, have already given up on Willie Taggart, and they're waiting for the string to end so they can hire somebody else. I'm certainly not there yet. I want to see what they look like in November of this year. My biggest problem with last year was they got worse as the season went on. So I want to see if at least that changes this year, and they can actually look better in November than they did in September, because that would be nice. That'd be a good change of pace. But overall, to answer your question, you've dealt with some seasons. But you didn't. When Clemson was mediocre, going through their mediocre stage, it wasn't like they had just come off a 29-game winning streak and then just flowed into mediocrity. Florida State was the team for 2 years. Really, they won. So they won 29. They won 35 out of 36 games at one point. 35-1. It's hard to fathom going from 35-1 to now 10-14 in such a short span. And Florida State fans, I think, are still there. I don't know that they're even numb to it yet. I think these losses still hurt, especially the one on Saturday. I think really hurt. The way it happened really hurt them, and it was anger. There was a lot of anger. Last year, I think by the middle of the season they were pretty numb to it because of the year before as well. Remember, Jimbo was 5-6 when he bounced, and he was 3-6 at one point that season. They were a bad football team in 17 too, and so. They kind of got numb to it, but then they start getting their expectations up. Okay, we're Florida State. We got $1 million offensive coordinator. We're going to score a ton of points. I think we got a chance to win 8, 9, 10 games this year. And then they blow an 18-point lead to Boise, and they were angry and irate. I know it's only 2 days after the fact or 3 days after the fact when we're talking to each other, but it doesn't seem to have tapered down much at all. There's genuine anger about their program. It's obviously it's Willie's program, but it's their program. They have ownership of it. They're fans, some for 30 and 40 years, and they're wondering what's going on with it when they look around the country and or even the conference and wonder how in the world are we this bad? How are we 10 and 14? How is that? How has this happened? How can this be allowed to happen and continue? And so there's really there's trepidation, man. I think they're really concerned about how long it's going to take to rebuild this thing, and if this guy's the right guy to do it.
So, your percentage on the percentage of fans who don't think he knows what he's doing, 80%?
Oh, yeah, probably. I would think so. I would think that might even be a safe estimate. Judging from my interactions, I get a lot of what is he doing? What is a lot of that. So I would say that might even be a conservative estimate of he doesn't know what he's doing. There aren't many. There are some, and they're pretty vocal too. That you got to give him time. He inherited a mess, which he did. So there is that faction too, but mostly people are just flummoxed. Like, how could it possibly be this bad? And that's why I wrote the column on Saturday that I did, because yeah, when you look at 5 and 8, it is really bad, obviously. But if you look at that game just in a vacuum, you wouldn't look at that game and say, how in the world is Florida State losing to Boise State? Like, that wasn't they were only a 4-point favorite. Right. So just losing by 5 points in the fourth quarter of a game isn't the end of the world necessarily. It's added on to what happened last season. And it just gives people no hope and no confidence, more importantly, that he is the guy to get this thing done. But they might all be singing a different tune in November of this year when they're 8-1 and number 4 in the country. Don't laugh.
If in late November they are, say, 4 and 8, can they afford to get rid of him then?
Yeah,
financially.
Yeah.
Can they afford not to?
Yeah, that's the real question. I think if they're 4 and 8 or 3 and 9, if it falls off a cliff, and you mentioned all those games they have, which are all winnable, except for there's really only one game that I would say is definitely not winnable. All the other games are winnable for this team. I think they're also all losable.
Yes.
So if they're all coin flips, you're looking at last year when they lost games, they lost them. Like, they got embarrassed. This year, I think you're going to have a lot more coin flip games. I think they are going to be more competitive. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. If you lose 8 games by 7 or less points, well, you still lost 8 games and you're Florida State. So, yeah, if they're a 4 and 8 or 3 and 9 and they owe him $20 million, man, I just don't know that Florida State is in a position financially to write that check. But as you pointed out, are they in a position to have 55,000 empty seats next year at their home games and no money coming in at all to the athletic department, to the boosters? Because that's what the risk you run when there's no hope. And if they go 5 and 7 and then follow that up with another losing season, there's going to be no hope, which means the money will kind of dry. It will dry up, and people are going to. A lot of people. There was even a pretty big booster on Twitter on Saturday that said, "I'm not giving another dime until we." And this was game 1 of the second season until there's a new coach. So you're gonna deal a lot with that. And so can you afford not to fire him? But can you afford to fire him and pay him $20 million to go? I don't know. And I think that's also too far. I mean, obviously that was a hypothetical that you presented, but I'm not convinced they're a bad football team. It really, I mean, again, I know Boise's not Alabama, but they actually hung with a well-coached, good football team that's used to winning and had them down by 18 points. And if they make a couple plays in that first half or early in the second half, I think they could run away with that game. Mm-hmm. But they didn't. They lost. We got it. But I'm not ready to give up on them as a program yet, or as a team in 2019. Not yet. But they got to handle the losing much, much better than they did last year.
Corey Clark, good luck staying warm in that cold press box this coming Saturday. Sure. And I know that the Florida State fans listening are really feel for you and are hoping that you're able to bring enough clothing.
Yeah. I'll probably bring a windbreaker, maybe. some hand warmers. Yeah, but by the way, it's supposed to be 98 degrees at kickoff when they play Louis Monroe at 5 p.m.
5 o'clock. Oh my goodness. Well, good luck.
Hey, are you guys going to take care of A&M? If Florida State fans are listening to this, that's what they care about. They care about the game you're covering this weekend.
I learned on January 7th. I'm never betting against. Well, not bet actually, but never picking against a certain number 16 ever again.
Did you pick against him?
I did. I picked Alabama.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. I didn't have faith in Clemson's offensive line that they'd be able to protect him. So,
well, you were wrong.
Yes, I was. Not the first time. So yeah, I think this offense is just is ridiculous, and that's going to be Clemson has some questions on the defensive front. They're growing some guys up, and I think A&M's going to score. My guess is it'll be an entertaining game for the most part. Clemson will just have too much firepower.
And I do think, just to go out on this, Jimbo's done a good job there, and I think they're a good team, and I think he's going to have them ready to play, and that might be Clemson's toughest game of the year, because that guy is a good coach. He's definitely good early in his career at a place, and those guys believe in him. I do think those players believe in him. I know that fan base does, and I think they're going to be ready to play, and they're not going to back down. I do think that. Now, I don't think they're going to win, but I think they're going to be ready to play, and he is a good coach. Man, it's crazy how what it was like in 2017 when he left.
Well, it just goes to show the importance of a good trigger man. A high level quarterback. Jameis Winston in one instance, Kellen Mond in the other, and then in between, some not very good ones.
Well, that's for sure, my man. And Florida State still got a few of them.
That's right. All right, man. Thank you so much for your time, Corey, and best of luck chronicling the rest of the season for Florida State.
All right. Appreciate it. Thank you, man.
All right. Thank you very much to Corey Clark and Cole Cubelic for sharing their time with us. Thanks to our 6 sponsors, including title sponsor Parham Smith and Archenhold Law Firm in downtown Greenville. Thanks most of all to all of you for making this a part of your routine. Man, we've had 5,000 downloads in the last 7 days. Really cool. 168,000 all time since we started this a year ago. Really, really appreciate that. And, of course, we'll have our second of the week later in the week, probably Thursday or Friday. So stay tuned for that. You'll have some maybe listening for your trip to and from Clemson if you are going to the game. All right, everybody have a great rest of the week and take care. Cheers.